Long before highways and even before the railroads, canals helped the American economy grow. That time has long passed. But there's a new glimpse into what life was like on these waterways. After a massive restoration, Washington, D.C.'s C&O Canal is once again welcoming boatloads of visitors for a lesson on this important chapter of American history.
Hold aboard, Georgetown! Canal boats again!
As this vessel takes visitors on a time-honored expedition, squeezing under low bridges and through narrow walls, its 30,000 pounds are guided entirely by hand.
This boat is a flat bottom, has no keel, so it just maneuvers like a living room couch.
Franklin Santa Croce captains today's trip on the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal in Washington, D.C.
So is it okay that we're bumping into things?
Yes, it's a canal boat. It's designed to bump into things.
Santa Croce moves the boat much the same way his predecessors did 2 centuries ago, when this passage revolutionized trade.
You guys, we're so far down.
The canal locks boats between heavy gates before deckhands change the water level, floating the boat from one lock to the next and allowing barges to move through elevations.
All right, let's go.
As it passes the historic Georgetown neighborhood, the boat retraces a chapter of American history defined by both the promise of westward expansion and gritty perseverance. This waterway helped modernize life for generations in the mid-Atlantic by providing a path for essential goods like coal. This spring, a tour recreating the first mile returned after 11 years as part of a massive restoration.
Were you nervous when you took this first ride out?
Oh, absolutely. Terrifying. It's a lot of boat. I mean, it's 80 feet long and 13 feet wide, and that pass we're going to be going through is probably about 16 feet wide.
Powered by electric motors rather than the mules that traditionally guided a boat, it tops out at a brisk 2 miles per hour. But history takes its time.
5 houses down is where George Washington negotiated the purchase of the land for the city of the District of Columbia.
George Washington.
1791.
This was a stable back during the heyday of the canal.
Rex Carnegie heads education outreach for the Georgetown Heritage Foundation, which helped fund the boat's return.
Why was it so important to bring a canal boat back to the C&O Canal here?
It's a good way to connect folks to the history, whether that's recent history here in Georgetown or whether that's the 200-year history of the canal.
This is crazy.
The tours have been deemed an instant hit.
Nowadays, everything's so mechanical, everything's automated. So seeing people actually get out and use that muscle power, that is a connection to our ancestors here.
The lock system in and of itself is fascinating.
That's one of the reasons why we always gather a crowd. I mean, people are always excited to see this boat either go up or come down that lock.
A vision from George Washington himself. Long before highways, the founding father imagined waterways linking the East Coast to the Great Lakes and Ohio River. The C&O Canal covers nearly 185 miles of that. Mile 0 marks a start, planted in front of a complex with its own storied stamp on American history, the Water Gate. The canal then weaves along dramatic waterfalls and through mountain tunnels on its way to Cumberland, Maryland, its destination nestled in the Allegheny Mountains. The path opened for trade in 1850, running alongside the Potomac River.
Let's go.
Where we jumped on the water with Christiana Hansen from the C&O Canal National Historical Park.
What did this area look like 200 years ago?
So the C&O Canal, it was a highway. You would have had bumper-to-bumper boats the same way you would have had bumper-to-bumper cars today going into DC. It was a very busy place.
Hansen took us to park headquarters in Williamsport, Maryland, the canal's halfway point.
This is one of the original buildings along the C&O Canal.
It is, yes. It's about 200 years old. Canal boats would come up in the basin here and unload coal. We would then load the coal into the trains, and they would head off to go and power the area.
When canal construction started, the project was an ambitious one and one of the country's first large-scale civil engineering projects. Despite the promise of its name, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal never made it to the Ohio River Valley, instead ending in Cumberland, Maryland after running out of funds. Operators still found plenty of coal there, and it became an early supply chain.
Heyday of the canal is the 1870s. This is right after we've had a civil war, so our country is rebuilding in really new and different ways. The canal is really busy, trade is expanding.
The peak of its heyday lasted about a decade during the 1870s, but the canal operated for nearly 100 years. Communities grew on and along the water as laborers, including families, worked the canal through all hours and seasons.
Some of my favorite pictures are kids with ropes around them that you go, why is that kid leashed? Yeah. Oh, it's so they don't fall in.
What a childhood.
Right? But you also would lead mules. So the big engines on the canal boat were mules, and kids helped lead them.
While canal trade thrived, the railroad remained a fierce source of competition, eventually overtaking it. And after several catastrophic floods, the canal closed in 1924.
Is this in some ways a failure?
I think it's a grand experiment. So the canal, it's a struggle to keep it running, and it was even back in the day. You're working against nature, and that's what they were struggling with in the 1800s as well. Trains were getting better and better, faster and faster.
Today, it's one of the most visited national parks, surpassing even Yellowstone, as people continue to honor a tradition of exploring and dreaming of more.
This canal, the railroad, the planes that are flying overhead, all of these things connect us to that tradition. And the thing that we can hope for is that things will become easier and more efficient.
Which is also ironic considering how much we want to preserve these chapters of American history so we can learn from that history.
Absolutely. That is a story of the people, not just the dates and not just the famous folks, but real everyday people. How does that connect to where we are and where we're going?
And it really was revolutionary at the time because either you don't really have many options at that point in history. Either you put it on a cart or a horse and you can't really go very fast or very far, or you put it on a river, and navigating those wild rivers can be difficult. So this really helped open up a new way of life for so many people.
More people visit than Yellowstone. That's amazing, including me. That was one of my favorite places to go when I lived in Washington. I always wanted to ride one of those. You beat me to it, girl.
And mile zero, the water gate.
Yes.
Kind of make you go, aha.
That was very cool.
Very cool. Storied stamp.